March 14th, 1945. 2:47 a.m. 3rd Army Headquarters, Luxembourg. The hallway was silent except for the rhythmic creak of boot leather on polished wood. Captain Richard Moss wasn't supposed to be there. He'd forgotten his cigarettes in the operations office after the late briefing, a careless mistake that would change everything. As he approached the filing room, he noticed something wrong. The door was cracked open, just an inch. But that door was never open after 2,100 hours. It required 2 keys, one held by the duty officer, one by intelligence. Protocol dictated both keys returned to the safe every night. No exceptions. Patton himself had instituted the rule after taking command. Moss froze. His hand instinctively moved to the .45 on his hip. Through the narrow gap, he could see a sliver of light dancing across the wall. Not the overhead fluorescence. Something smaller. Handheld. A flashlight, maybe, moving in deliberate sweeps across the filing cabinets. He pressed himself against the wall and listened. The sound was unmistakable. Film advancing. The mechanical click-whir of a camera shutter. Over and over, methodical and quick. Someone was photographing documents. Moss drew his pistol and pushed the door open fast. The man inside spun around, camera still in hand, his face caught in the beam of his own flashlight, now rolling across the floor. For a split second, neither moved. Then Moss saw the uniform, the chevron stripes, the 3rd Army patch. American, one of their own. "Don't move," Moss said, voice low and steady despite the adrenaline slamming through his chest. "Hands where I can see them." The sergeant, mid-30s, average build, forgettable face, raised his hand slowly. The camera dangled from a strap around his neck. Behind him, classified operation maps lay spread across the table. Troop movements, supply routes, communications frequencies, the kind of intelligence that could get entire battalions killed. "Captain, I can explain." "Shut up." Moss kicked the door fully open and shouted down the hall. "Sergeant of the Guard, now!" Within minutes, the room flooded with MPs, their rifles trained on the man who stood frozen under the harsh overhead lights. The camera was seized. The film canister pulled from his jacket pocket. A second canister from his boot. A third taped inside his belt. But it was what they found in his footlocker an hour later that made the blood drain from every face in the room. A radio transmitter, coded cipher sheets, and a leather pouch containing $4,200 in cash. More money than a sergeant made in 2 years. By dawn, the entire headquarters was locked down. No one in, no one out. Guards posted at every door. And General George S. Patton was sitting in his office, staring at the evidence laid out on his desk like pieces of a nightmare he couldn't wake from. His own headquarters, his own men, compromised. The rage in his eyes was something the officers present would never forget. Not the fiery, theatrical anger Patton was famous for. This was colder, surgical, deadly. "Bring him to me," Patton said quietly. Alone. The room emptied fast. No one wanted to be there for what came next. Because everyone knew, when Patton said alone, he meant it. And when he got that tone in his voice, that flat, emotionless calm, someone was about to learn what real fear felt like. The traitor was taken from his cell at 0630 hours, hands cuffed, flanked by 2 stone-faced MPs. They marched him through the silent corridors of the chateau that served as headquarters. Clerks and aides stepped aside and looked away. Word had already spread. Everyone knew what he'd done. They stopped outside Patton's office. The door opened. Inside, the general sat behind his desk, perfectly still, his ivory-handled pistols resting in their holsters on either side of him. The room smelled of leather and gun oil. The morning light cut through the window at a harsh angle, casting half his face in shadow. The MPs shoved the sergeant inside and closed the door behind him. And for the first time since his capture, the traitor realized something far worse than a court-martial was waiting for him. The sergeant stood in the center of the room, hands still cuffed, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Patton didn't look at him. Not yet. He was reading a folder, slowly, deliberately, letting the silence build like pressure in a seal drum. Finally, He closed the file and looked up. Sergeant William Harding, Patton said, his voice soft, almost conversational. 3 years of service. Good Conduct Medal. Promoted twice. Assigned to 3rd Army Operations since Normandy. He paused. Trusted. Harding opened his mouth to speak. I didn't give you permission to talk. The words cut like a blade. Harding's jaw snapped shut. Patton stood slowly, came around the desk, and leaned against it, arms folded. He was in full uniform, boots polished to a mirror shine, tie perfectly knotted, stars gleaming on his shoulders. Every inch the general. But his eyes were something else. They were the eyes of a man who had seen every kind of death war could offer and had stopped flinching a long time ago. Do you know what you've done? Patton asked quietly. Harding's voice cracked. Sir, I asked if you know. Louder now. Sharper. Yes, sir. No, you don't. Patton pushed off the desk and stepped closer. Close enough that Harding could smell the tobacco on his breath. You think you sold some papers for money. You think this is about you getting caught with your hand in the cookie jar. He turned and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the courtyard below where soldiers were beginning their morning drills. Let me tell you what you actually did, Patton said. 2 weeks ago, we moved the 4th Armored Division to a staging area outside Trier. You photographed that movement order. 3 days later, German artillery hit. A supply convoy on that exact route. 14 men killed. 23 wounded. Harding's face went pale. Last month, Patton continued, not turning around, you transmitted radio frequencies for our forward observation posts. The Germans jammed our communications during a counterattack near Saarburg. We lost contact with 2 infantry companies for 6 hours. By the time we re-established command, 37 soldiers were dead. Surrounded. Cut off. Because they couldn't call for support. He turned back to face Harding now, and the look on his face was colder than any winter in Europe. You didn't sell papers, Sergeant. You sold lives. American lives. My soldiers. Harding's legs were shaking. I didn't know they would. You didn't care. Patton's voice was almost a whisper now, but it filled the room like thunder. You took their money and you looked the other way. That makes you worse than the enemy. The Germans fight for their country. You're just a coward who sold his brothers for cash. Patton walked back to his desk. He picked up one of his revolvers, the ivory-handled Colt .45, and turned it over in his hands, examining it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. The weight of it, the balance. Then he set it down on the desk, right in front of Harding. You have 2 options, Patton said, his voice flat and emotionless. Option 1. I call the MPs back in. You face a general court-martial. The evidence is overwhelming. You'll be found guilty of espionage and treason under the Articles of War. In wartime, that carries 1 sentence. He paused. You'll be taken to a stockade, held until the war ends, then executed by firing squad. Your family will know what you did. Your name will be in every newspaper in America. Your mother will have to live with the shame of raising a traitor. Harding was openly crying now, tears streaming down his face. Option 2, Patton continued, gesturing to the pistol, is right there on the desk. 1 round. In the chamber. You pick it up. You do what a soldier is supposed to do when he's disgraced his uniform beyond repair. Quick. Private. Your family gets a telegram that says you died in the line of duty. They never have to know the truth. They can bury you with honor you don't deserve. The room went silent except for Harding's ragged breathing. Those are your choices, Patton said coldly. Pick one. Harding stared at the gun. His hands were trembling so badly the cuffs rattled. He looked up at Patton, searching for mercy, for some sign that this was a bluff, a scare tactic. There was nothing, just the general's cold, unblinking gaze. Slowly, Harding reached for the pistol. His fingers were inches from the grip when Patton's hand shot out and snatched it away. No, Patton said, voice like iron. You don't get the easy way out. He turned the gun over in his hand, then placed it back in its holster with deliberate care. You're going to stand trial, Patton said. You're going to sit in that courtroom and hear every name. Every soldier who died because of what you did. You're going to look their families in the eye when they testify. And then you're going to spend the rest of your miserable life in a cell thinking about it. Every single day. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You don't deserve an honorable way out. The door opened. 2 MPs stepped inside and hauled Harding to his feet. He didn't resist. Couldn't. His legs barely held him as they dragged him out into the hallway. Patton watched him go, expression unreadable, then turned back to his desk and lit a cigarette. He didn't sit down. He stood at the window, smoking in silence, watching the sun climb higher over the Luxembourg countryside. Somewhere out there, his Third Army was preparing for the next push into Germany. Tanks being fueled, artillery being positioned, men writing letters home they hoped wouldn't be their last. And one of those men, one of his men, had been selling them out. A knock at the door. Come. Colonel Oscar Koch, Patton's intelligence chief, entered and stood at attention. Sir, we've completed the preliminary damage assessment. How bad? Koch opened a folder, though Patton could tell he'd already memorized every word. Harding had access to operations for 6 months. Based on the film we recovered and the transmission logs from his radio, we estimate he passed the following to German intelligence: troop movement schedules, supply route maps, communications protocols, and at least 3 major offensive plans, including preliminary details for Operation Undertone. Patton's jaw tightened. Undertone was their upcoming assault across the Rhine. If the Germans knew the details, thousands could die. We're cross-referencing enemy activity with the dates of his transmissions, Koch continued. There are at least 4 incidents, ambushes, artillery strikes, reconnaissance actions, that correlate directly with information he provided. Confirmed casualties stand at 63 killed, over 100 wounded. Patton closed his eyes for just a moment. 63. Young men who'd never see home. Mothers who'd get telegrams. Wives who'd become widows. All because one man wanted money. What about the Germans? Patton asked quietly. What do they know now? That's the interesting part, sir. Koch flipped a page. Signals intelligence picked up German transmissions 2 hours ago. Encrypted, but we broke the code. They're talking about Harding's arrest. Patton turned sharply. They know already? He missed a scheduled transmission last night. When he didn't make contact this morning, they assumed he'd been compromised. But here's the critical detail. Koch met Patton's eyes. They're pulling their assets out. All of them. Every intelligence operative they had positioned to monitor Third Army movements is being recalled or going dark. For the first time that morning, something resembling satisfaction crossed Patton's face. They're scared. Yes, sir. They don't know how much we know. They don't know if Harding talked, if we broke his network, if their other agents are compromised. They're shutting down the entire operation rather than risk exposure. Patton took a long drag on his cigarette. Good. Let them wonder. Let them sweat. Koch hesitated. Sir, there's something else. The amount of money Harding received, over $4,000, suggests he wasn't working alone. That's more than a sergeant could justify spending without raising questions. He had to have a handler. Someone helping him move the cash, cover his tracks. Find them, Patton said flatly. I don't care if you have to turn this headquarters upside down. I want every person Harding spoke to, every friend he had, every detail of his life since he enlisted. Someone helped him. Someone looked the other way. I want names. Yes, sir. And Oscar. Patton turned from the window, his expression hard as granite. From now on, I'm personally inspecting security. Random times. Random locations. I want locks changed on every classified space. I want new protocols for document access. And I want every man in this headquarters to understand one thing. He paused, letting the words land like a hammer. Betray this army, and I will destroy you. Not just your career. You. Everything you are. Everything you could have been. There will be no mercy. No second chances. No quick end. Koch nodded slowly. He'd served with Patton long enough to know this wasn't bluster. This was a promise. One more thing, sir, Koch said carefully. The press is going to get wind of this eventually. A treason trial of an American soldier will make headlines. There will be questions about how he operated undetected for so long, why our security didn't catch him sooner. Let them ask, Patton interrupted. I'll tell them the truth. War is fought by human beings, and human beings are capable of evil. But I'll also tell them this. His voice hardened. "We caught him. We stopped him. And we're making damn sure it never happens again." That's more than the Germans can say. Koch saluted and left. Patton returned to the window, watching his soldiers drill in the courtyard below. Young faces, determined faces, men who'd volunteered to cross an ocean and fight an enemy most of them had never seen, all because they believed in something bigger than themselves. And one man had sold them out for the price of a used car. The court-martial happened 3 weeks later. Closed proceedings. Military judges. No press. Harding was found guilty on all counts within 40 minutes of deliberation. The sentence: life imprisonment at hard labor, rank stripped, dishonorable discharge. He was led from the courtroom in chains and sent to a military prison where he would spend the next 32 years before dying of a heart attack in 1977, alone and forgotten. But the real impact wasn't the sentence. It was what happened after. No one knew when Patton would appear. 2 a.m., 4 a.m., sometimes just after midnight. He'd walk the hallways of headquarters in full uniform, boots echoing on the floors, hands clasped behind his back, inspecting everything. Doors, locks, guards. He'd stop at random offices and demand to see duty logs. He'd check filing cabinets personally, rattling locks, testing security protocols. The first time he found a door unsecured, he fired the duty officer on the spot. The second time, he assembled the entire headquarters staff at 3 a.m. and made them stand at attention in the freezing courtyard for an hour while he delivered a speech about discipline, trust, and the cost of failure. No one forgot it. Word spread through Third Army like wildfire. The old man was watching. Always watching. You couldn't relax. You couldn't get sloppy. One mistake, and you'd face the same cold fury that Harding had seen in that office. But it wasn't just fear. It was something else. Something deeper. The soldiers realized that Patton wasn't just protecting secrets. He was protecting them. Every lock he checked, every protocol he enforced, every midnight inspection, it was all to make sure that no one else would die because some traitor sold them out for cash. Morale didn't drop. It soared, because now they knew their general wasn't just leading them in a battle. He was standing guard while they slept. Meanwhile, across the lines, German intelligence was in chaos. Intercepted communications revealed frantic discussions among aware officers. Harding's network had been one of their most valuable assets inside the Allied command structure. Losing him meant losing visibility into Third Army operations at a critical moment in the war. But worse than losing the intelligence was the uncertainty. They didn't know what Harding had revealed before his arrest. They didn't know if the Americans had turned him, if he was feeding false information, if the entire network had been compromised. Every piece of intelligence that had come through Harding's channels was now suspect. Plans based on his reports had to be scrapped. Resources had to be reassigned. One captured German officer, interrogated weeks later, admitted that the loss of their American source had crippled our ability to anticipate Third Army movements. Another said that Harding's arrest had created a climate of paranoia, where German commanders stopped trusting their own intelligence. Patton had done more than catch a spy. He'd weaponized the capture. He'd turned one traitor's arrest into a psychological operation that paralyzed enemy intelligence for months. And he never spoke about it publicly. There were no press conferences, no medias, no dramatic pronouncements. The official record showed only a brief notation. One sergeant court-martialed for unauthorized possession of classified materials. The full truth remained buried in classified files. Because Patton understood something that most commanders didn't. The shadow war, the intelligence war, was just as important as the battles fought with tanks and bullets. Maybe more important. And you didn't win shadow wars by bragging about your victories. You won them by making your enemy afraid, by making them doubt, by making them pull back and second-guess every piece of information they received. Harding's arrest did all of that. But it did something else, too. Something Patton never anticipated. In the years after the war, when historians began piecing together the intelligence operations of World War II, they found something remarkable. After March 1945, German espionage efforts against Third Army effectively ceased. Not just scaled back, ceased. The Germans abandoned attempts to infiltrate Patton's headquarters. They stopped trying to recruit assets within his command structure. They relied instead on aerial reconnaissance and signals intercepts, safer methods, but far less effective. Why? Because Patton had sent a message louder than any propaganda broadcast. Betray this army, and you don't just get caught. You get broken. Publicly. Completely. And the organization you work for gets burned so badly, they never try again. It was brutal. It was ruthless. It was exactly the kind of iron-fisted leadership that made Patton both legendary and controversial. But it worked. Third Army continued its drive into Germany with unprecedented speed. They crossed the Rhine. They liberated concentration camps. They pushed deeper into enemy territory than any other Allied force. And they did it with one critical advantage. The Germans couldn't predict their movements anymore. The intelligence edge was gone, and it never came back. When Patton died in December 1945, killed in a car accident just months after the war ended, the full story of Sergeant Harding remained classified. His family never knew the truth. The public never heard the details. Even most of the soldiers who served under. Patton had no idea why security protocols had suddenly become so strict in the spring of 1945. But in the quiet offices of military intelligence, among the men who fought the Shadow War, the story was told and retold. A cautionare, a lesson in ruthlessness, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on the front lines. They're fought in locked rooms, in silent confrontations, in the cold, hard decisions made by commanders willing to do whatever it takes to protect their soldiers. Patton never regretted what he did to Harding. He never second-guessed the choice to deny him an easy way out. Because in Patton's mind, the equation was simple. One traitor's suffering versus the lives of thousands of soldiers. There was no moral dilemma. There was only mathematics. And the math was brutal. Years later, when the classified files were finally declassified, historians would debate Patton's methods. Some called it justice. Others called it cruelty. Some argued he overstepped his authority. Others said he did exactly what a wartime commander should do. But none of them could argue with the results. After Harding's arrest, not a single confirmed case of espionage occurred within Third Army for the remainder of the war. Not one. Because fear, when applied with precision, is a weapon. And George S. Patton knew how to wield it. The final entry in Harding's military file, written in the neat handwriting of a military clerk, reads simply, "Subject convicted of espionage. Sentenced to life imprisonment. No further action required." But beneath that, in the margin, someone had added a single line in pencil. It was later erased, but forensic analysis recovered the words. Patton was right. No signature. No date. Just 3 words that summed up the entire affair. The war wasn't just fought with tanks and bullets. It was fought in shadows, in locked rooms, in the cold calculations of men who understood that sometimes mercy is a luxury you can't afford. And when the enemy is listening, when lives hang in the balance, when betrayal lurks in your own headquarters, you don't just catch the spy. You make an example so brutal, so absolute, that no one ever tries again. That was Patton's way. And in the spring of 1945, in a war that demanded ruthlessness, it was exactly what Third Army needed.